They say some memories etch themselves into your bones, like scars with no skin. Mine began with a whisper. At first, the sentence was so brief and casually harsh that it barely registered. Almost. It was the kind of spring afternoon that Charleston writes poetry about. Golden lights spilled through the stained glass windows of St. Andrew's Chapel, soft hymns floating in the air. The scent of blooming wisteria curled through open windows like silk ribbons. I sat in the front row of the church in a pale lavender dress, my hands gently clasping a bouquet of hydrangea. My heart was full of pride, of memories, of bittersweet joy. James, my son, stood tall at the altar, his smile nervous but radiant. His bride would walk down the aisle any minute. And then came the whisper. After this, I'm moving out. Everything's packed. We'll talk later. I didn't turn my head, didn't flinch. I just stared ahead, blinking slowly, forcing the world to stay still. The voice belonged to David, my husband of 31 years. His breath, warm against my cheek, carried the words that would end everything. He didn't say them with cruelty. He didn't say them with guilt. He said them like he was ordering another glass of wine at dinner. Calm, final, done. I didn't let myself react. Not then. My son was at the altar. My daughter-in-law was about to walk into our lives. This moment was not about me. Of course, dear, I whispered back. My hands didn't tremble. My voice didn't crack. However, an internal shift occurred. David leaned back, adjusted his tie, and smiled. He looked like a man who believed he had finally liberated himself, who thought the timing of his announcement was genius at the cusp of a beautiful day when I would be too surrounded, too composed, too distracted to respond. What he didn't know was that I had already known, and I had already begun. You see, marriages don't shatter in a single blow. They chip away. A forgotten anniversary occurs here, someone made a condescending remark there, a glance held a second too long with someone who isn't you, your phone remains locked, a cold bed, there's a smell that doesn't belong in your house. It had started for me months before. I'd been folding laundry when I first noticed the scent. Cologne I didn't recognize. Not the bottle I bought him for Christmas. Settler. Younger. Spicier. Then the trip started. David, the man who hated flying, was suddenly a frequent traveler. Client meetings, he'd say. Board obligations. He'd bring back souvenirs, keychains, postcards, and artisanal jams from airports. The guilt was so textbook it insulted me. The phone remained silent. The phone was always on silent, face down. I never left anything unattended. I was no fool. I just needed evidence. That's when I called Miranda Chang. Miranda had been one of my brightest students during the 3 semesters I taught community college finance. She was exceptionally sharp. She is currently employed as a forensic accountant at one of the most esteemed firms in Manhattan. She picked up after one ring. "Anna?" she said. "What's wrong?" "I think I'm about to find out," I replied. Within 2 weeks, she had delivered more than I expected. She also delivered less than I had hoped. David wasn't just cheating. He was stealing. He was quietly draining our accounts. He was setting up shell corporations, creating false invoices to hide transfers. Some money had gone offshore, some were investment accounts I didn't know existed, and some, most, had gone to her. Her name was Rachel. She was 27, with long brunette hair and a penchant for Instagram filters. She was a strategic brand consultant whom David had met at a fintech summit. He paid her rent, her student loans, and her gym membership. He bought her a French bulldog named Pico. He bought her a life. And now, sitting next to me at our son's wedding, he thought he could just whisper a goodbye. What he didn't know was that I had been preparing for something significant. I was not preparing for a confrontation. I was not preparing for a physical altercation. This is a moment of reckoning. David and I met on the first day of orientation at Vanderbilt. He wore a navy blazer in the humid September heat and had the audacity to say it was for presents. I thought he was insufferable. 3 months later, I thought he was mine. We married the summer after graduation, barefoot in a beach chapel in Folly, surrounded by friends who toasted to our future with warm champagne and louder dreams. I was supposed to start law school that fall. Instead, I started building our life. David was magnetic, especially in rooms full of wealthy men. He could make any conversation seem important. Banking was a natural fit. He rose fast. I followed his path with quiet pride and a growing notebook of dreams I'd folded away. James and Ellie came 3 years apart. I was the kind of mother who made homemade Valentines and matching Halloween costumes. I built our home life like a fortress. Every meal, every budget, every vacation meticulously planned. Behind closed doors, I balanced our checkbooks, filed our taxes, and made sure David never had to remember a dentist appointment. We were that couple, the ones neighbors envied and friends confided in, the ones who seemed to have cracked the secret code to marriage. But David's ambition was like fire. It warmed you until it burned straight through. The first real warning sign came just after Ellie left for NYU. We were empty nesters overnight. I expected we'd travel, reconnect, maybe even revisit the law school conversation. I even brought it up once while we were having dinner in the backyard. He looked at me like I was suggesting we move to Mars. Instead of growing closer, David became a ghost with a wallet. He'd leave for work early, stay late, and claim weekend emergencies that sounded increasingly vague. I started noticing that he no longer touched me when he passed by. No hand on my shoulder, no absent-minded kiss on the forehead, no warmth. I'd wait up, pretending to read, listening for his car. Sometimes he came home, sometimes he didn't. There were other signs too, subtle things. His wardrobe shifted. Out went the khakis and Oxfords, and in came tailored suits and slim-fit shirts. He joined a new gym without mentioning it. He started wearing a cologne I hadn't bought. I confronted him once. It was raining, and I had just poured a glass of wine I didn't really want. We were sitting in the den, the only light coming from the TV screen, muted and flickering. I asked, "Is there someone else?" He paused, smiled that patient smile I used to adore. "Anna, you always overthink things." He was right. I did. I overthought everything, because it's how I survived, because I had no other choice. That night, I didn't press further. I didn't cry. I watched the rain trace its fingers down the window, and I made a decision. If he was going to treat me like I didn't matter, I'd make sure I was the most dangerous person he overlooked. The next morning, while he was in the shower, I opened a new bank account. I initially made modest deposits, including book royalties from a parenting guide I had ghostwritten years ago, speaking honorariums, and old savings bonds my grandmother had left me. I cashed them in, quietly. No paper trail that led back to him. Then I started digging. I pulled out every file box in our home office, every dusty receipt, and every old tax return. I knew the shape of our finances. I had always handled the home side of the equation, but now I wanted to see what he was hiding. That's when I found it. A credit card bill addressed to a P.O. box I didn't recognize. The charges made my stomach turn. Jewelry stores, boutique hotels, luxury spa packages, all dated during weekends David claimed to be on the golf course with clients. I contacted Miranda Cheng that night. She had been my brightest student years ago. Now, she was one of the most meticulous forensic accountants in Manhattan. We hadn't spoken in a while, but she picked up immediately. "Anna," she said, "is everything all right?" "No," I answered, "but it's going to be."
Over the next month, Miranda and I built a digital map of David's duplicity. There was the condo in Atlanta, leased under a shell company name. There were the wire transfers to a woman named Rachel Price, 27, recent MBA graduate, strategic brand consultant, and social media influencer. Miranda sent me screenshots of Rachel's Instagram. Her posts were filled with luxury yoga retreats, expensive skincare routines, and a French bulldog named Pico. Paid for by my husband. I stared at those photos for a long time, not because I was heartbroken, because I was insulted. That this was the person he chose, that he believed I was too naive or too devoted to see the truth. But the affair wasn't what truly broke me. The affair was a symptom. The disease was something deeper. It was the deliberate erasure of me, the quiet exile. He had systematically cut me out of decisions, finances, and plans for the future we were supposed to share. It was the realization that David had slowly rewritten the story of our marriage, and in his version, I was just a footnote. But I knew better. I hadn't spent 30 decades as a passive participant. I had kept the family afloat. I had structured our investments. I had protected us when markets tanked and friends lost everything. I had balanced every book, renegotiated every mortgage, and researched every trust. I may not have had a corner office, but I had been the one keeping the lights on. And now, I would weaponize that knowledge. While David smiled across boardroom tables and posted vacation photos with Rachel in secret, I built a firewall. I closed loopholes, I restructured ownership, I moved every asset I could under legal protection. One by one, I took back what was mine. And when the time came, when David whispered that coward's goodbye at our son's wedding, he thought he was catching me off guard. But I had already buried the matches. The fire was coming.
By the time David whispered his little bombshell at James's wedding, I had everything in place. He thought he'd cornered me. He believed that amidst the chaos of bouquets, champagne, and planned dances, I would be too taken aback to respond. Motherhood had silenced me. The need for appearances paralyzed me. He wasn't entirely wrong. I did care about appearances. Only until the curtain closed did I care. After his whisper, I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I stood beside him in all those family portraits, my smile picture perfect, my hand resting lightly on his arm. But my mind was already on the manila envelope waiting in my bag. Inside it, the beginning of his undoing. 3 months earlier, I'd retained Leah Talbot, a partner at one of Charleston's most respected family law firms. I hadn't told a soul. Even my sister was unaware of the situation. Leah had fire in her eyes and steel in her voice. She also had experience with high-profile, high-asset divorce cases, the kind of cases that never made it to court because the other party quietly folded before it could get that far. Leah called it the blueprint. Our strategy had 3 pillars: asset protection, reputational insurance, and psychological positioning. It wasn't about war, it was about precision. Step 1 was locking down the assets David didn't know I controlled. Over the years, I'd set up small investment accounts under a trust named after my grandmother. I'd built a portfolio that spanned real estate, municipal bonds, and private equity. All legal, all documented, all mine. We moved those assets under new legal protections. Step 2 was reclaiming what we'd built together. Miranda helped identify all the joint accounts David had been siphoning from. Leah ensured we had evidence that would establish financial misconduct, a major advantage under South Carolina divorce law. Each transfer to Rachel, each hotel stay, and each personal expense masquerading as a business write-off were meticulously documented. We logged it, photographed it, certified it. The third step involved using psychological leverage.
We needed to time everything so that David would believe he was still in control, right up until the floor vanished beneath him. I started acting as if my life was at stake. I laughed at his jokes. I ironed his shirts. I planned the bridal shower with the same energy I once reserved for our anniversary trips. I smiled in every photo, hosted every guest, and poured wine at every toast. But I was also meeting quietly with Leia and Miranda, sometimes in the back office of a floral shop, sometimes at a private table in a wine bar. We worked late into the evenings crafting legal documentation, lining up affidavits, and securing forensic fraudits. And then came the final piece of leverage: Rachel. Miranda dug deeper into her past. It emerged that Rachel had contributed to a startup in Atlanta that had discreetly ceased operations. Lawsuits followed. There were whispers of misappropriation. Although there were no criminal charges, the reputational damage was significant. The damage to her reputation was significant enough to deter serious investors. I hired a private investigator named Darren Ross to follow her for 2 weeks. His findings weren't salacious, but they were useful. Rachel was careless. She liked to overshare. One particularly enlightening video featured her sipping rosé on a rooftop bar, telling a friend she was just waiting for David to dump the Ice Queen. I wasn't offended. I was delighted. We have now encrypted the recording on 3 hard drives and included it in our legal packet. We reserve the right to release it only when it becomes essential. The wedding came fast. Our house buzzed with visitors and florists and caterers, and David, he glowed. He exuded confidence, as if he had already managed to flee. He kept checking his watch, glancing at Rachel seated 2 rows back. He thought he had timed it perfectly. But I had timed it better. After the reception, after the final dance, after the last guest had departed, David and I stood alone in our backyard. The air was soft. Magnolia blossoms clung to the breeze. He looked relaxed, pleased with himself. "That went well," he said, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeves. "She looked so happy." "She did," I replied. Then I turned to face him fully. "I believe you mentioned we needed to talk." His eyebrows rose just a bit. "Yes, look, Anna, I know your situation isn't easy, but we're both adults. If we handle the situation maturely, it doesn't have to be messy." I reached into my purse and handed him the envelope. I couldn't agree more. He opened it slowly, read the first page. Next, he turned to the second page. I watched his expression shift from smug to confused to stunned. "These are... Wait, does this date back to 3 weeks ago?" "Yes," I said gently. "I filed after Miranda traced your 3rd transfer to Rachel's LLC." His hand trembled slightly. You had someone..." "I had a team, David, because unlike you, I value planning." He flipped to the asset list. "This can't be right. Could it be that the beach house was included? Are the Fidelity accounts included? The trust?" "All the accounts have been legally transferred. Months ago." "You can't do that. These were joint assets." "That was the case," I said, taking a step closer, "but you dissolved that joint agreement the moment you started moving funds without disclosure. The law agrees." He dropped his hands, the papers fluttering like wounded birds. For the first time in years, David looked scared. "This is going to ruin me," he said quietly. I nodded. "If you fight it, yes. If you cooperate, it stays clean. No courtroom, no scandal." He stared at the ground. "Rachel doesn't know about this, does she?" "She will by morning." I didn't say it with cruelty, just clarity. This wasn't an act of retaliation. This was a correction. I turned and walked back towards the house, the porch lights creating long shadows that covered the brick path. Behind me, I heard him sink onto the bench where we used to drink coffee together long before things turned into a performance. I didn't look back. The blueprint had worked, but the reckoning had just begun. By Monday morning, the shock had started to ripple through David's world. He didn't call, he didn't text, he didn't rage. He vanished for exactly 36 hours. During that time, I went about my day. I attended James and Leela's post-wedding brunch, dressed in soft blue linen and a practiced smile. Guests hugged me, complimented the wedding, and mentioned how lucky James was to come from such a strong, loving family. I accepted each word with the calm of a woman who had memorized every move in advance. When people asked where David was, I told them he was handling an urgent client situation. A deal had gone sideways. There were real estate issues in Savannah. I used the same tone I had once reserved for sick day calls to the school office. Routine, believable. Inside, I felt nothing. Not numbness, not pain. Just precision. The man who had shared my life for over 30 decades had tried to write me out of our story. However, he overlooked the fact that I had co-authored each chapter. By Tuesday, David resurfaced. A message popped up on my phone while I was sitting in my attorney's office. "We need to talk, please." I didn't reply. Instead, I reviewed the updated file Leah had prepared. In it was everything: proof of financial misconduct, statements from our PI, screenshots of text exchanges between David and Rachel, and digital traces of off-the-books accounts he had hidden under his firm's subsidiaries. We had even uncovered evidence of improper business write-offs. Dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants were logged as client strategy sessions. Spa weekends labeled executive wellness retreats. All of it was fraud. And all of it was admissible. That night, I received an email from David. It was longer, polished, like a man trying to regain control. "Anna, I realize now I went about this the wrong way. I want to fix this before it goes any further. Let's talk. It's just the two of us. We can figure out a solution that works for both." I stared at it for a full minute. Then I forwarded it to Leah. She called me 5 minutes later. "He's starting to understand what you've done. That's the tone of a man standing on a glass floor with a hammer in his hand." I laughed. I didn't laugh because it was humorous. The reason I laughed was because it was true. The following days were characterized by a calm and peaceful atmosphere. Miranda deleted her Instagram, her consulting website vanished overnight. Mutual acquaintances started calling me, not to pick sides, but to check in. Their voices were careful, cautious. It seemed as though they were aware of the deterioration of my facade and wished to ensure my safety. I wouldn't. I was already on higher ground. Miranda and Leah coordinated with a financial firm to begin the process of asset reclamation. David's unauthorized transfers were now subject to civil litigation. They secured the trust fund for Ellie's tuition. The beach house was retitled. My name, once hidden beneath layers of household, now adorned everything that held significance. Then came the meeting. David asked for one, formally through his lawyer. We met at a neutral office space downtown. The location featured stark walls and common artwork depicting marsh grass. He looked older than I remembered, tired. The tan he had acquired in Aruba with Rachel had faded, leaving behind a pale, sagging sense of regret. He never meant for it to get this far. I said nothing. He was just unhappy. I thought maybe if we had some space. You thought you could have both. I interrupted. Excuse me? You thought you could keep the reputation, the career, the family image, and still play house with a woman half your age. He had the decency to look ashamed. At least, I think it was shame. He's made mistakes, but do we really want this to go public? There it was. His Achilles heel. Reputation. Then don't fight the divorce. Sign the agreement, return what you stole, and walk away. He'll lose everything. No, you'll lose what you never deserved to keep. He stood and paced the room. Miranda's leaving Charleston. She says she doesn't want to be part of a scandal. She was never part of anything real. It was just a temporary phase. You were never man enough to end that season yourself. He sat back down, quiet now. You had the chance to come to me, to be honest, to treat me like the woman who built your world while you stood in front of it pretending you did it alone. He didn't reply. What could he possibly say? By the end of the meeting, the draft agreement was in his hands. Leah's team had made it generous, if he complied. If he didn't comply, the court would record every document, photo, and invoice. He signed it 2 days later. He did not sign it out of regret. He signed it out of fear. And just like that, the man who once whispered freedom into my ear during our son's wedding ceremony signed his name to a future he could no longer control. 6 months later, the garden was in bloom again. Magnolia blossoms fluttered above the stone path where James and Lila had danced under string lights. The ceremony chairs were long gone, but I could still feel the echo of music, the rhythm of a night that had changed everything. The day David signed the divorce agreement, something in me went quiet. This silence wasn't a sign of defeat. In relief, it felt as though I had been bearing a burden unknowingly for years, and at last someone lifted it. He kept his word, for once. Or maybe Leah's relentless pressure made him realize there were no other options. The divorce was processed swiftly and discreetly. He surrendered the condo, the false accounts, and the stock transfers. We recovered enough to ensure my financial future and Ellie's, and, though he didn't deserve it, James's too. David moved into a small rental in Mount Pleasant. No view, no valet. There were only walls and consequences to contend with. Rachel left town entirely. Charleston wasn't kind to secrets once exposed. Word of their affair, though never officially publicized, trickled through our social circles like smoke under a door. She closed her business accounts. Her name faded. And mine? Mine began to rise. I launched a nonprofit called Restored Roots, a financial education program for women over 40 navigating divorce or financial abuse. I hosted weekly workshops in the historic district. I brought in speakers. Miranda even flew down for the opening seminar. Ellie joined me during her winter break. She didn't know everything, but she knew enough. One night she found me in the kitchen, sorting papers, and wrapped her arms around me. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. Those 4 words meant more than every applause I'd ever received. James, too, slowly came to understand. I'd waited until after the honeymoon, after the housewarming, after the fragile newness of his marriage had taken root. I told him the truth cleanly, without venom. He listened. And when I was done, he took my hand and said, "You never let it touch us. Thank you." That night, I sat on my porch, wrapped in a shawl, sipping tea, and realized something simple but profound. I hadn't just survived David's betrayal. I had rewritten its ending. He thought he was escaping. However, he was merely opening the path to my liberation. People like David operate on belief. They hold the conviction that they are the creators of their own destiny. They believe that we, the quiet ones, the caretakers, the planners, are merely there to embellish their empires. He never thought I'd be the storm. But I was. And storms, when they pass, leave clearer skies. Now I walk this garden alone. Not lonely, alone. I experience a solitude that evokes a sense of ownership rather than abandonment. Every bloom reminds me of what I protected, of what I rebuilt. Sometimes guests still comment on that wedding night. They tell me it was the most beautiful celebration they've ever attended. The flowers, the food, the music. They don't know that while they danced, I was quietly disassembling a 30-year deception. They don't need to know. All that matters is this. I stayed graceful, I stayed smart, I stayed kind, until the moment it no longer served me. Afterwards, I transformed into a completely different person. Something free. In the end, the affair wasn't David's biggest mistake. I believed I wouldn't see it coming. And his greatest mistake? He overlooked the fact that I was more than simply his spouse. I was the one who built the house, and I was the one who walked away with the keys.
What did you learn from the experience? share your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that even the deepest betrayals can ultimately lead to growth and renewal. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes losing what you thought you had is the beginning of finding something